Thank you all for being here. Archbishop Hannan, a little after 3 o'clock this morning, resting very peacefully, sleeping at the Chateau de Notre Dame, died and went home to the Lord. Sister Anthony and I arrived there shortly afterwards and were able to pray with him, pray for him. Obviously, at a moment like this, from a human perspective, there is mourning, there is grief. He was, and still is, a man who is well loved and well respected and truly one of us here in New Orleans. And so there is mourning, and we will miss him. At the same time, we know that Archbishop Hannan would not have wanted to linger on in the weakened condition that he was in. And I believe that God was indeed very loving and very merciful, that he didn't have to linger any longer. I think it's important that we remember, as we express our gratitude to God for Archbishop Hannan, that it was on this very day, September the 29th in 1965, that Pope Paul VI appointed him as the Archbishop of New Orleans. He was at Vatican II, he was in Rome in Vatican II, and he was appointed on this very day. And as we know, Hurricane Betsy we were in the midst of Hurricane Betsy, and he left Rome and came to the Archdiocese of New Orleans to be with his people, whom he had never really met before. He served us as a good shepherd, as a dedicated bishop, the Archbishop of New Orleans, for 23 years. And he has been retired for 23 years, and I suggest that during those 23 years he has continued to work very hard and to lead us in his own way as a bishop. We commend to God now, and as we begin these days, we commend to God a man of faith, a leader of the church, a man who certainly loved the church and his great love for the people. And also we say farewell and we honor a man who was truly a New Orleanian, even though he wasn't from here. He was truly a New Orleanian. And he worked tirelessly for this Archdiocese and for all that it represents in those 23 years. We were able to fulfill one of his dreams or requests. He had said that he wanted to die in the bed where his mother had given birth to 8 children and where he slept for many years as the Archbishop of New Orleans, and the Pope used the same bed when he was here for the papal visit. And we were able to, in the last couple of days, move the headboard of the bed. He was obviously in a hospital bed, but we were able to move the headboard of the bed into his room. And so we were pleased that we were able to fulfill that important request on him, that he would have that linkage to his mother, to his 7 siblings, and to Pope John Paul II. On a personal note, Archbishop Hannan certainly was, for me, a mentor. He ordained me to the diaconate, to the priesthood, and also he was a co-consecrator when I was ordained a bishop. And he was truly a mentor and a father figure. And I will always remember him with great respect and great love. And I, along with so many of you, will truly, truly miss him and miss all that he did and brought to the Archdiocese of New Orleans. Bishop Favre, our auxiliary bishop, joins me in thanking so many people who have already expressed their condolences and their love and support of Archbishop Hannan, and we appreciate that very much. And I also express gratitude on behalf of his brother, Jerry Hannan, who is here with us in New Orleans. He has been here for the last week, and all of the family members. Now Jerry is at 89, is the last living sibling. And as we know, Archbishop Hannan was 98 when he died this morning. I would like to introduce a number of people who join me here at the podium, and I introduce them because they represent in a very particular way many of the projects that were initiated by Archbishop Hannan. In his 23 years, he worked tirelessly and continued day after day, year after year, to have a vision of what the church could do for the people of New Orleans. And these people represent the various programs, projects, and ministries that are now a part of the Archdiocese of New Orleans. First of all, we have Gordon Wadge, who is the Executive Director of Catholic Charities, Deacon Dennis Adams, who is the Director of Christopher Homes, Wayne Plaisance, who is the Director of the Chateau de Notre Dame and also the Weinhoven, Bob Menard, who's representing the Catholic Foundation for Peter Quirk, Eric Olson, who is the Director of Project Lazarus, and Natalie J. Rowe, who is the Director of Second Harvest Food Bank. And all of those are programs in his 23 years that he began, and all of them continue today, and certainly through the years they have grown considerably, certainly within his spirit and within his vision. I do want to share with you the arrangements for his funeral. On Monday at 5 o'clock, we will receive his body at Notre Dame Seminary. There will be a special evening prayer service for the priests of the Archdiocese. After that service, after the Liturgy of the Hours evening prayer, the wake will begin at 6:30 and will continue until 9 o'clock on Monday. Archbishop Hannan will lie in state all day on Tuesday at Notre Dame Seminary, and the public are certainly invited to come and to pay their respects and to thank God for a man of great faith and a great shepherd of the church. He will also lie in state on Wednesday of next week until 2 o'clock. And at 2 o'clock, we will have a procession from Notre Dame Seminary to St. Louis Cathedral. And that procession will begin at 2. Arriving at St. Louis Cathedral, we will then have a continued wake that evening until 9 o'clock. The funeral will be next Thursday, 1 week from today, at 2 o'clock. We will begin the liturgy, and he will be buried in St. Louis Cathedral. There is provisions that have been made long, long ago for the archbishops of New Orleans to be buried in the floor of the sanctuary. And he will be buried there. We will have the funeral mass there, and then immediately after the funeral mass, we will place his body in the burial place, and then the ceremony will end. I thank all of you for being here and for your interest and condolences on the death of Archbishop Hannan, and we appreciate your willingness to help us get the word out so that we can continue to thank God for him and to give respect to his long ministry here. Be glad to answer any questions.
What time on Tuesday will the public viewing begin, and Wednesday?
It'll be 9 to 9 on Tuesday, and on Wednesday 9 to 2, and then further viewing at the cathedral after I would expect that the procession would take probably about 2 hours.
Archbishop, what can you tell us about Archbishop Hannan's relationship with President Kennedy and the Kennedy family?
He was very close to President Kennedy. It is a known fact that President Kennedy would call him for advice, and he became very close to Jackie and to the kids and to the entire Kennedy family. But during his time as auxiliary bishop in the Archdiocese of Washington, he was a true advisor, consultant of President Kennedy. Yes?
Archbishop, what do you see as his lasting legacy here in New Orleans? He did so many great things during his time as Archbishop and after. What do you see as his lasting legacy here? Is it as a priest, or is it as a civic leader? Is it as an innovator?
That's a tough question, but I will try to answer it. I think that his legacy will be that he called together and invited people of all faiths and all denominations to come together as a community and to work for God and to work for the good of the community and trying to better this community and also to better the world. As we all know, one of his favorite hymns was "Let There Be Peace on Earth." And I think that in many ways he was indeed a peacemaker as he brought people together of different races and ethnic groups and different ways of thinking, that he really did bring people together.
Did he say anything? I mean, I know the last few days he really wasn't talking very much. Do you remember some of the last things he said?
I remember two things in particular. On Saturday, we did not expect that he would live through the night. Saturday, the doctor told us that he was near death, and so we had a mass for family and a.
We got it. Thank you, Chris.
We had mass, a mass of the Viaticum, which is a mass where he receives communion and he receives the body of Christ, and we sent him forth with that nourishment in preparing for his death. And it was a very emotional time for those of us who were there. And it's clear that he knew some of what was going on Saturday, because after I gave him absolution, the forgiveness of sins, according to our tradition in the Apostolic See, he had not said much all day. And then he said, "Sounds good to me." And that's Archbishop Hannan. Sounds good to me. So he knew that he was being reassured and God was forgiving him. The other thing that I thought was significant yesterday, as I was leaving, I gave him a blessing. And I didn't think he was coherent at all, to tell you the truth. But I gave him a blessing. And then I said, "Why don't you give me your blessing?" And he heard me and understood it, because he tried to raise his hand, and he had trouble doing it, but he, in his own way, made that sign of the cross. And I will always consider that an important farewell that we were able to exchange.
This is considerably a tougher time in the Catholic Church, arguably, than when Archbishop Hannan took over as Archbishop here. What advice did he give you when you came back to New Orleans to help bring the church back together and bring people home?
He often reminded me that as bishops, we have to work hard, do our best, keep the ministry of Jesus Christ in focus. But he also reminded me very often that God is the one who is the true shepherd, and we just have to follow Jesus. And it always hit me as very important, because we can get involved in so many things and lose focus that it's the Lord who is at work, and we simply humbly try to represent that. But he was very consistent in saying that.
Could you talk about him as a Saints fan?
About what?
A Saints fan, Kansas Saints fan.
He was a Saints fan, as you know, and went to as many games as he possibly could when he was Archbishop, as well as when he was retired. And also went to the Super Bowl. And I remember sitting next to him at the Super Bowl, and during the first quarter, we were just very much slightly into the game. During the first quarter, he said, "That's enough, bring me home." Well, he didn't quite realize that we were in Miami and there was no car and we couldn't go home. But he loved the Saints, and I think he loved the Saints, though I know he had some passion for football. I think for him it was more than football. For him it was the community coming together, and it was the spirit of the community. And I think that's what drew him to the Saints games. And last season, he was I think he only missed one home game. The story goes is that when the Saints when they began the Saints, they asked him if they could name the team the Saints, and he tells the story that he reminded the owner at that time that many of the Saints were martyrs, and so he just wanted them to know that that's part of the package.
Did he say anything about looking forward to seeing Pope John Paul when he passed?
I'm sorry?
Did Archbishop Hannan say anything about looking forward to seeing Pope John Paul when he passed, since it was such a great hero of his?
Yeah, not that I recall. Not that I recall. But I certainly, when I look back on his life, certainly one of the highlights of his life and his ministry here was when Pope John Paul II, now Blessed John Paul II, came to New Orleans. He was so proud of that. And I was happy the Pope came. I think I was more happy that Archbishop Hannan was able to experience it and to share that with the city.
Archbishop, you mentioned that the Saturday was kind of an emotional time, especially around this this Mass about Viaticum, in which he signaled perhaps his last farewell to you. Who was there for that? Can you describe that? What time of day was that?
It was at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was members of his family who were in town, and some other people in the Archdiocese whom he has been close to through the years. And one person that he's been very, very close to through the years has been Doc Laborde, Alden Laborde, and he was able to be there. Doc himself is 90, I think, 91. Is he 95? You're right, Peter, he is, he's 95. And it was, to me, it was very important and significant that he was there.
And Jerry was there?
Jerry was there, yeah. The other people who were there were the Mr. and Mrs. Benson, V.M. Wheeler, who had been an advisor to him since his retirement.
Is it Satanovich?
Yes, Clara Satanovich.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And help me, Alma, his secretary.
Alma?
Mm-hmm.
And his nephew, Tom?
And his nephew, Tom. Yes, that's right. His nephew, Tom, and his brother, Jerry. And if I missed anybody, I'm sorry, but I think...
Clint Bozier, his caregiver, long-time caregiver?
No, he was not there.
And this was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon?
Correct. In his room.
And at the time of his actual passing, were there people attending to him?
There was
Or did he simply slip away and people noticed it later?
there was, remember, the staff at the chateau was with him, and as she told me when I got there this morning, that she really didn't, she just heard sort of a slight noise, and she assumed that it was just his kind of breathing heavy, and she went in and he had died.
So he was, at the time of his last breath, he was alone by himself in the room. I don't mean to make anything of it, I'm just
No.
trying to understand what happened.
Right. The staff
Right.
person, the sitter was there, but and you know, I can't help but think that with all that he's been through, I would not be surprised if that's the way he wanted it. He's led a public life in many, many ways, and goodness, the last couple of weeks, it's just been a stream of people going through the chateau, and it wasn't a surprise to me that he passed away
Right.
quietly during the night.
This is it's an odd and almost irrelevant question, but for the record, what would the death certificate say? What would Archbishop Hannan have died of in the last analysis? What would the cause of death be? How would you describe it?
At 98, the body got tired.
Yeah. You can't find you can't.
No.
Okay. He had no chronic. We said he had no chronic illness. He was not actively ill with any diagnosis.
No, I mean, there were various infections because of, being being elderly, and there was slight heart problems that he had been having. He was also had been diagnosed long ago as near diabetic, but there was no serious illness. And in his 23 years here, I only remember that he was in the hospital once.
So let me ask you how he managed his illness and he managed his death in light of managing one's life and death.
Yeah, I mentioned this on Saturday when we had the Mass of Viaticum, that I mentioned at the time of the homily. I said, I'm not really going to use words. I'm simply going to point to him. He is the living homily, and he is a man of God, dedicated to the church, a great shepherd among us. And I said, he not only taught us how to live, but he's also taught us how to grow old gracefully and die. And he really did. I really believe that he wanted to keep going as long as he could. And he taught us in many ways how to live, but I think he also taught us how to grow old gracefully. And for a man who was very independent, he became totally dependent on others and never, ever complained about it. I don't ever remember hearing him complain about it.
Can you walk us a little bit through the, I guess, transformation of the Archdiocese from when he was appointed in '65, I believe it was, to when, the 23 years later, just the transformation of, I guess, the Archdiocese in this time?
Yeah, when his predecessor was here, Archbishop Cody, he bought a lot of property, realizing that the Archdiocese would be growing. And he went up in a helicopter and literally planned where the parishes would be because of the growth, and also caused a lot of debt in doing that, needless to say. And it was really Archbishop Hannan's vision a couple of years later in building those parishes. The number of parishes that were built in the late 60s and the early 70s. So it really was an expansion of the Archdiocese. I would say that the other thing that has changed significantly is his outreach, his attentiveness to social justice, and his outreach to the poor and the elderly, those who are hungry. He truly lived out, in a literal way, the command of Christ and the invitation of Christ when he said, "When you have done it for one of these, the least of my brothers and sisters, you have done it for me." And he truly lived that out.
Archbishop,
Could you talk about I talked to people this morning who felt they knew him personally, although they were just, had gone to Mass and stuff. Could you talk about the effort it takes for an Archbishop to sort of be in touch with the people out on the street, so to speak?
He really had a charism, I think, and people who he had met maybe a couple of times, but people felt a natural connection to him, and people did feel a real sense of a real personal touch that came from him. And I think that was a God-given charism that he had.
Archbishop Hannan was the president and founder of WLAE-TV. How would you say he had an impact on the media?
One of Archbishop Hannan's dreams throughout his entire life was communication, and it's just a couple of years ago he was still in some way involved in communications, and he wanted to use the media, particularly television, in any way that he could to get the gospel message out, and he saw it clearly as a part of his mission and ministry of evangelization. And he also, just in recent years, came to the Bishops' Conference, and he was trying to sell us onto the digital media and all the and it was kind of funny because we wouldn't expect to hear that from a person in his 90s, but he was in touch, and I don't think he understood it, but he knew it was a way to communicate the message of Christ.
Archbishop, you mentioned that Archbishop Hannan died, 46 years to the day from when he was first ordained as Archbishop here. What do you make of that? Do you think that's just coincidence, or is there something else out there that we can surmise from that particular?
I honestly don't think that there are those coincidences, and I'm not saying he picked the date, but I think it is just very interesting and providential, God's way of nodding his head and giving us the opportunity to thank Archbishop Hannan for a full 46 years.
Do you have, is the Archdiocese going to remember Archbishop Hannan in some type of a memorial?
Yes, we are.
What are you doing on Sunday at Masses?
On Sunday at Masses, the Masses will go on as usual because they should and they need to. But he certainly will be remembered at every Mass in the prayers of the faithful and in the intentions of each of the priests who will be presiding at Eucharist. We also, in a tangible way, will open an endowment or a fund in his name. And so anyone who wants to contribute to that and to help us continue to live out and build upon his vision, that people would have an opportunity to do that. We We will have, and I think this is worth noting, that we will have flowers in the chapel at Notre Dame Seminary and at the cathedral, but we would prefer for people to utilize their resources in other ways, because in neither place do we really have a lot of room for a lot of bouquets. There will also be a link on our website where people can go and to tell their own stories and to share their memories of Archbishop Hannan.
Will that fund be dedicated to a specific purpose?
No, it'll be open to continue to strengthen the ministries, the many, many ministries that he began.
Have you heard from any other religious leaders, like the heads of maybe local synagogues or other type of, have they reached out or maybe offered any kind of?
No, not as of yet. I'm sure they will, but not as of yet. Okay. Thank you again for being here, and I'm sure we'll be seeing one another over the next week, here, there, and everywhere. You are invited on Monday to join us at 5 o'clock for when his body arrives at the seminary. The actual prayer service will leave the doors open, but the prayer service will be closed. You can see in, but it'll be closed to the public. It'll be just the priests of the Archdiocese, and then obviously the procession and so forth on Wednesday, and the wake is certainly open to the public, and we'll do through Sarah McDonald will do anything we can, and we want to do anything we can to facilitate your being able to get the story.
So Monday he arrives at the chapel at the seminary at 5 p.m. Liturgy of the Hours. Then public visitation begins at 6:30 that evening and continues until 9 p.m. that evening. That's correct. And then reopen.
And then the next day it's 9 to 9. Then the next day is 9 to 2. Thank you all.